Hi everyone, it's me, Carolyn again. And in this video, we're going to look at chapter 1 in basic stats, and we're going to look at section 1.2. This section is a little bit shorter than the first section in the fact that we have fewer topics to talk about. So it's going to be a little bit shorter video. But this section, we look at, now that we've talked about data, how do we go about and gather this data? And we're going to look at just some of the variables and some stuff. So we're just getting started. The rest of this chapter kind of looks more into how do we gather the data that we're getting, and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to switch to my notes. So again, these are posted for you to help take notes for yourself so that you can study a little bit better, fill in some of the gaps from what you have read in the textbook. And hopefully it switches. There we go. And this is how we collect. Well, chapter 1 is data collection. So this is going to be looking at more of how we get our data. In the first section, we looked at, just some of the terminology that goes with data. Data being qualitative versus quantitative. Qualitative is more of an explanation. Quantitative is more numerical measurement of some sort. In that quantitative, we have discrete and continuous data. And then we looked at the different levels of measurements that putting all of the data that we have into a certain level. And building on that. In here, we're going to talk about now how do we gather this data? Okay, so again, some more terminology. So we have, a lot of times we have experiments or something, and we might have a control variable. So let's say the level of drug that a subject gets or doesn't get. And we'll look at some of that stuff too. And we call those things like our explanatory variable, kind of explains things, that control. And then what we're kind of looking at is what the response is, that outcome. So if we have more than one variable and we're kind of looking at data, we like to use that control variable being our X. So on that horizontal axis, if we're going to graph this, and our response variable being that Y. Okay. And when we're doing these studies, we'll talk about some of the things that can happen when we do studies or do experiments. Now, we do have two different types of studies. We do have something called an observational study. And basically, we just go and observe what we got. Okay, we go and we gather, we look in a room and we see, okay, we have 15 boys and 13 girls. That's what we observe. We could weigh people, and that's what we would observe. We could observe the different eye colors, the different hair colors, and things of that nature. Or we could design a study, and this is when it's a little bit more technical, and we can see what happens. So giving people drugs and seeing what happens to them, or mice, or whatever we do, or if we add this amount of drops to this happens, so it's kind of a design study. If I change this on the battery, it's going to last longer. So we look at the different things we can change in a battery to make them last longer, or a light bulb, or all of these different things. So we have more of a designed study. So observational study, we just observe what happens or what we have. Design, we kind of a little bit more into it. And in these design studies, we do look more closely at the explanatory and the response variables. In here, some things we're going to kind of also see, some more terminology, is some confounding variables. Okay, a confounding variable is something that could be affecting our outcome, but we can't get rid of. So when we talk about people, a lot of things that we can't get rid of is our life experiences. Okay, the way we might try to bombard you with different ads or something, but your experiences can affect how you react to those things. Your body makeup can react to how you react to a certain drug or whatever. So things that we can't really get rid of. And then also some lurking variables, which are hard to get rid of because we don't even know they're there. So a lurking variable is something that is affecting things, but it's not even considered in the study, but it somehow affects the response. So we didn't even know it was there. So there are lurking variables. They kind of lurk in the background and affect things, but we can't get rid of them because we don't even know they exist. We don't know what they are. Okay, confounding variables, we might know what they are, but we just can't get them out. Okay, so that's kind of some things. And we're just going to touch on those. We aren't going to really talk about how to get rid of them, but we want to remind ourselves when we are looking at data and studying data that those sorts of things are there. We have confounding variables. We have lurking variables because we are not grown up in a vacuum. We are not completely sterile. So those things do happen. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit, one more topic, is about our observational studies. We'll look more into those designed studies a little bit later in this chapter. And again, we're not going to spend too much time on actually creating different design studies because that's something that you would depend on what you were gathering, how you would design it, how many subjects you need, all of that kind of stuff is something that is done in the development stage of the experiments to begin with. We are just going to touch on the fact that, hey, these things exist and they're out there. So just being aware of the different types of, in this section, observational studies, in section down the road, some of our design studies. Okay, a cross-sectional study is, first of all, a short-term study. And what it does is, again, observational, we're just looking. We're not really designing stuff, we're just gathering information. So we're talking about, we go a cross-section of people, we take some data, and we're done. Okay, we go into, Western does it all of the time. They go into the classrooms, they gather, they do a survey on you, they gather a ton of information, and it's done. Okay, that's kind of a cross-sectional study. Now, what we do with that data will determine, but we haven't really done anything to you guys. We haven't, except you guys all came here. So, but all these surveys that you get is our cross-sectional studies, our short-term observational studies that we're gathering data. A case-controlled study, that's one that goes back in time. So going back and gathering data or looking back and gathering information from past people. So like after you have maybe looking at people that were, how do I say this? And I'm not going to say it correctly. So just kind of looking back into the retrospective. So going back in time and saying, oh, 15 years ago, I did this and that happened. Or, you know, kind of going back. A cohort, in the other case, is one that kind of goes forward. So we gather you and we're going to follow you as you go forward. And a lot of times we do that. We will gather information from you in 4 years or in 10 years or in 15 years. So kind of those are the 3 different types. And again, it kind of looks at short-term, retrospect going back in time, and prospective kind of following you throughout the time. So those are the 3 types of observational studies. In the next couple sections, and some of these sections I might combine together because they are relatively short, but they're going to continue on this, how do we gather data? go from there. So 1.2 again was a little shorter, just kind of looking at the different types of studies that we have. We have observational studies where we just gather information. We don't really do anything to our subjects. We just gather the info. And then we have design studies where we actually perform some sort of experiment and so forth. And again, all of these variables that go into these things that create all this data for us to devour, so to speak. Okay, I look forward to seeing you in my following videos. Again, if you have questions on any of the topics that we're talking about, feel free to email me as you're reading the textbook, working on the homework, and all of that wonderful stuff. So talk to you guys later.